if you don't address that negative self-talk, then no matter what you do, you're just going to revert back to your old patterns. Health is not a destination that we're trying to reach. Health is a daily practice.
Changing your microbiome it really influences your food thoughts.
Yes.
It's actually creepy in a way.
This is the Transformational Life Consulting Podcast with Dipa Grandin, MD, where Christians like you get the practical support and tools you need to build your spiritual, mental, and physical well-being, and to guide you on your journey to health and wholeness based on evidence-based science and God's Word. I am your host, Dr. Dipa Grandin.
Thank you to all our regular listeners for taking the time to listen to yet another episode of Time to Transform. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our first-time listeners. We hope you find the information provided useful and will continue to make Time to Transform part of your spiritual health and wellness journey. So as most of you know, I am a board-certified lifestyle medicine physician. At the heart of lifestyle medicine subspecialty is the science of intentional living. So intentional living, if you were to give it a definition, it's a deliberate, value-driven approach to daily choices and long-term goals. To date, there are several publications as well as major organizations such as the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association that consistently promote incorporating lifestyle changes as the first treatment option for any of the chronic lifestyle diseases. And even in today's day and age of GLP-1s, intentional lifestyle choices are still emphasized because, as most of you know, or even if you're not aware, we now have more information about potential side effects with these weight loss, diabetes medications, such as muscle loss, bone loss. And unless individuals are being intentional in countering those side effects, they will succumb to long-term effects of using these medications. Research has also shown that individuals who adopt intentional living practices such as mindfulness, goal setting, aligned with core values, and purposeful time use, they actually experience measurable improvements in physical health, mental health, and you can even tangibly account for these changes because a lot of these individuals can lower their blood pressure, reduce their blood sugar levels, and even have strategies of improving their immune protection against cancer development. And once you have stress reduction, there's also reduced risk of heart disease. So we know there are several mechanisms that play a role when you live intentionally that cause these amazing protective attributes by intentional living. One of which is the marker of stress, which is cortisol levels. And we also have several studies that have shown improvement in immune function. So by prioritizing meaningful engagement over just passive consumption, intentional living creates this feedback loop of motivation, personal agency, and then just building resilience within your body. And you also have psychosocial dimensions of how intentional living supports long-term wellness because it helps to regulate emotions. You're being purposeful in making meaningful social connections, and it brings so much satisfaction in life. Studies on positive psychology highlight that individuals who live with clear purpose and intention are more likely to sustain health-promoting behavior, including being intentional of incorporating physical activity, planned predominant nutrition, adequate sleep. That's just a few of these things. And just having an alignment between values and actually living based on those values, they not only mitigate burnout and decision fatigue, but they can also foster a sense of coherence, meaning there is this uniformity in what you believe and how you live. And this has been shown to be a huge predictor of longevity and psychological well-being. So as the healthcare system is shifting more and more towards preventative care models, intentional living emerges as a critical evidence-based strategy for, basically cultivating like a holistic health approach. So today, to help us further delve into this topic, we had Dipa Chauhan. Dipa is a retired pharmacist. She became a functional medicine provider after she discovered her passion for disease prevention. She was working in a hospital oncology unit, and while collaborating with oncologists and healthcare team, she played a huge role in optimizing chemotherapy treatment and managing side effects. And during this time, she witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of cancer and other preventable diseases. And she herself had some personal health struggles after childbirth that reinforced the power of nutrition and lifestyle and recovery. So she's committed herself to intentional living. And when she saw how much it benefited her, she's now made it her passion and career choice. She advocates for balanced diet, a positive mindset, and joyful movement to prevent chronic disease. She authored a book called Healing Habits, which I've been very fortunate to read. And it's a beautiful book, which she's made very simple, sustainable lifestyle changes that anyone can follow. And she now leads the Living Light Metabolic Reset Program, which is a 10-week program designed to support weight loss, boost energy, improve sleep, and balance hormones. So Dipa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast to share your experience on intentional lifestyle-focused living. Before we get into the podcast, please tell us a little bit about yourself. In your book, Healing Habits, you poignantly share your life experience that led you to transition from being a pharmacist to empowering individuals to adopt simple, sustainable lifestyle choices. Please, can you share this story with us?
Yes, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. And in terms of my story, so as you mentioned, I was traditionally trained as a pharmacist and working in the oncology department. And at the time, my husband was actually traditionally trained as a chiropractor and really getting into more functional medicine type of work. And so that piqued my interest and I started going down that rabbit hole. But, I just newly graduated from pharmacy school, so I wasn't really quite ready to transition just yet. But it wasn't really until my personal story with the birth of my son. So I had an extremely amazing and healthy pregnancy, still working out right up until the very end. And it was my labor and delivery, which, there was some complications that occurred. Basically my son's hand was, wedged on top of his head. So it was very difficult for me to have a vaginal birth. Ended up having a C-section after about 48 hours after my water had broken. I just wasn't dilating. It took a long time for me to be able to try a vaginal delivery, which was unsuccessful. So they did have to do an emergency C-section because at that 48-hour mark around that time, his heart rate started to drop. So they, went ahead with the emergency C-section. And at that time, I guess, with the multiple vaginal exams that I had, I guess I had developed an infection in my uterus and I basically was bleeding to death. And so my son was delivered happy, healthy, thankfully. And here, I am basically, bleeding to death. And the surgeon at the time, the OBGYN, I was asking what's going on. As a pharmacist, I knew some of the medications they were calling out. So I kind of knew what was going on. And she said, just close your eyes and pray to God. And then next thing you know it, I'm out under general anesthesia. And when I woke up from that, what I had discovered is I had to have a hysterectomy to stop the bleeding. They tried medication to stop the bleeding, but it just wouldn't stop. So I did have a hysterectomy. And then the story doesn't end there. About a week later, I developed a slow bowel, which is common with abdominal surgeries. It's called an ileus. And, they wanted to keep me in the hospital just until I was feeling better, until my bowels were moving more. But I just wanted to be home with my newborn son. So I did, request to be discharged, and the OBGYN on call was hesitant, but he gave me his cell phone number. There is a little bit of a backstory there too, because technically he should have come in to check on me on Saturday night, which could have potentially prevented a lot of these complications. But he sent his resident, and he said, the hand on top of the head, it's not a complication. You guys should be able to figure this out. I was with a midwife group. He made the midwife cry. So I think he felt guilty. And he gave me his phone number and discharged me home. And then a couple of days later, I just started having excruciating abdominal pain. So I had to be readmitted, and found out that I had a small bowel obstruction. So I had to have another surgery, which they were a little bit hesitant to do right after the C-section, but ended up having, they tried to resolve it laparoscopically, but there was just too much scar tissue that had developed. So they had to do surgery again. And so I missed pretty much the first month of my son's life. Thankfully, I had very supportive parents and in-laws who took care of my son and brought him to the hospital every day so I could spend a bit of time with him. But essentially, after that month, as you can imagine, my health was not in the greatest shape. I had a lot of fatigue. I had, and then of course you layer on a newborn on top of that. I had lost a lot of weight. I wasn't sleeping well. Of course, I had to be mindful of my digestion and eating high fiber foods. And so, I was living in the US at the time, and I decided not to go back to work and just dedicate, those next few months and years to healing myself and to being with my son, because I knew I could only have one child, right? Mm-hmm. So I really, with the support of my husband, who had fully transitioned to functional medicine at that point, implementing healthy lifestyle strategies, healthy nutritional strategies, was able to pretty quickly recover to the point where I was able to transition my son from being 100% bottle fed to 100% breastfed after 9 weeks. So that was, something that I was proud of, because everything else did not go my way. Yeah. And that was one thing I really wanted to do. So I was happy that I was able to do that after 9 weeks of being out of the hospital.
Yeah, wow. What an amazing story, Dipa. I think there's nothing more powerful than a personal testimony. Because even in my own life, my intentional journey got to be so much more intentional after my kids were born.
Absolutely.
And then you just have this completely different reason that you want to live and be and make these choices for another human. And that's such a powerful reason. And it also shows how powerful intentional living and making those good choices are, because nobody will understand how hard breastfeeding is unless you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
And then, to go from 9 weeks of not breastfeeding to be able to breastfeed, that's an amazing feat. So well done. And I'm sure, makes your heart so full that you were able to do it. And that's the reason why I'm so glad you're on this podcast, because there's so many people out there that, truly question. And also it doesn't help that there are a lot of voices out there that talk against intentional living or making good lifestyle choices, that it doesn't really matter how difficult it is. And yes, it can be difficult, but at the end of the day, even the small baby steps that you take adds up. It's almost like compounding and investing. And when you look at longevity and biological age, every time you eat the fruit instead of the hamburger and you exercise instead of binge watching Netflix, you're actually putting years of healthy life into your life bank. So as you age, you are able to do the things you want to do with your loved ones and live the life you want to live. So, in your book, you talk about the magic ingredient, self love, and you also share self love practices. And I totally can see where that comes from, because when you're making these intentional, healthy lifestyle choices, that is so an act of self love. So, please, can you share these practices and explain why they are essential?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of us have some form of negative self talk. And with my population, I see a lot of women in their, mid 40s and beyond who have years of these patterns of negative self talk, looking in the mirror with guilt, with shame, not liking the person who they see in the mirror. And really, if you don't, address that negative self talk, then no matter what you do, whether it's supplements or functional lab testing or lifestyle changes, you're just going to revert back to your old patterns, right? So it really does require an identity shift and a paradigm shift when it comes to long-term health changes. And I think, it's very quick for us to jump into like, oh, let's work on the nutrition and let's work on the sleep and let's work on, all the things. But if you're not changing that negative self-talk, then those patterns are going to come back, right? And all the work and effort that you put in is for a lot of people going to be erased if we don't address the shift in the identity that needs to take place to take on this new lifestyle and this new paradigm. And so one exercise that a couple of exercises that I recommend to clients is just taking the time to journal and write down any thoughts that come to your mind about guilt or about shame or about how you feel about yourself or your body. This is not just like a one-day exercise. It's something that can take a few weeks, a few months. And it's really just cultivating that awareness, because some of us are not even aware of the thoughts that go through our mind, right? So just slowing down, becoming more aware of our thoughts. So one of the things I really also recommend is having some sort of meditation practice where you focus on your breath for about 5 minutes a day and just notice the thoughts that are going through your mind. And, what I recommend is just writing down some of these things after a meditation practice, for example, that might be coming up. And, a simple thing that you can do is once you write those things down is you can burn that piece of paper, right? And kind of just let those beliefs and thoughts go, right? Another thing that you can do is an identity exercise where you write down all the things that you want to do, right? And you give yourself an alter ego type of name, right? So it could be like determined Dipa, right? Where, determined Dipa wakes up at 6 a.m., gets some morning sunlight, does 5 minutes of meditation, does some grounding, drinks some filtered water, right? And you really write down all these things that you want this alter ego to take on from a lifestyle perspective, from a relationship perspective, from a career perspective. And you just keep it really simple. And, you can print that out and keep it somewhere visible. And really, it's not about perfection, it's about progress, right? And really just starting with the simple things like you said, right? Um, doing little things that are ultimately an act of self-love, right? So when you prioritize your health, when you prioritize your well-being, when you take care of yourself, that is an act of self-love, right? A lot of people think that self-love or self-care is getting a massage an hour a month, right? Self-love and self-care is the little daily things that you do in addition to some of those other things. So, a couple of things that I recommend to my clients is, as I said, starting with a nice glass of water in the morning with a fresh squeeze of lemon juice, right? Creating a nice morning routine where you do 2 or 3 things, right? Whether it's getting a few minutes of morning sunlight, getting your feet in the grass. Perhaps it's taking a nice bath with essential oils once a week. Perhaps it's going out for a walk in nature, right? And I always like to talk to clients about adding things first into their life rather than taking away, right? So what healthy practices can you add into your lifestyle? Maybe it's adding a little bit more fruits and vegetables to your meals, right? And like you said, these simple practices can go such a long way.
Yeah, totally. Because we do a lot of spiritual coaching as well in our churches. And, everyone talks about the golden rule. And, in the Gospels, Matthew and Luke, it talks about do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And when you have all that self-hate, and it's very, very hidden, and it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? It can be very dangerous when you don't acknowledge the presence of how you feel, because a lot of times we don't take time to be introspective or to evaluate our own thoughts. And for some individuals, they just feel like I'm just not this very nice person. I deserve to suffer. I deserve, not to do well in life. And we don't even know where those thoughts come from. Sometimes it's the way we were raised. And it's just have all these subliminal messaging in our subconscious that unless we take time to self-evaluate, we may not even identify. And that shows out in our other relationships. And, sometimes we're like, why can I not be loving? Why can I not be forgiving? And it's a lot of times just a reflection of how we treat ourselves. So I think everything you just spoke about, when you start doing these good things for yourself, you're so filled with self-forgiveness and love that you cannot but help show it to others. And more importantly, when you have that relationship with God and He's showing you forgiveness, and He's so much bigger than we are. And when He's showing us forgiveness and He's showing us this love, and He fills our hearts with His love, we cannot but help with His help to show it to others. So I think everything you spoke about, the sunshine, adding things as opposed to taking away, it's really, really great, because that's something I tell my coaching clients too. If you're used to eating 10 pizzas, don't try to switch to 10 salads, because your microbiome is not going to be able to handle it. I have so many patients with irritable bowel syndrome, and they're like, Doc, I was doing great when I was eating unhealthy, and now I'm trying to eat healthy and I'm miserable. And that's, I have to explain your microbiome is like this living organism that has to be developed. And I think in the same way, the changes that we make in life, they have to be done in such a gradual way that we meet ourselves where we are. And then addressing that self-hate, the self-loathing, that's so crucial. How about the, so you did talk about the the inner negative self-talk, and you spoke about incorporating some of the, the small baby steps that you can take to do positive things like drinking a lot more water, getting more sleep, the sunshine bit of it. And you also mentioned in your book about the impact of gratitude. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Because there's like tons and tons of research now that shows the positive impact of gratitude.
Yeah. So gratitude is such a powerful tool that we can all use on a daily basis. Sometimes we get caught up in all the things that aren't going right in our life, right? But when we shift to a state of gratitude, it really shifts our outlook on life, right? And I think sometimes when people think of gratitude, they think of things that, are unique or have to be like these big things, right? Like, oh, a trip to Italy or something along those lines. But gratitude really can be just really simple things, right? Being grateful for a nice, comfy bed, right? I just this past weekend I went backcountry camping for 3 nights and 4 days. Something that's totally out of my comfort zone, and a first for me, a first in many areas. And, when I came home, I was so grateful for, having like a nice roof over my head, having a nice comfy bed, having a nice clean bathroom, having a shower, right? Like these are all things that, we can think of in our daily lives that we take for granted that can really shift our mental state of being, but also has been linked to lowering inflammation in the body, lowering cortisol levels, right? Which in turn are going to optimize immune function, optimize digestive health, optimize brain function. So there's so many ripple effects from lowering cortisol through gratitude that can make such a profound difference in your health, right? And ultimately is going to lead to things like better sleep and better food choices as well, right? Lowering blood pressure, lowering blood sugars, all through a simple practice of gratitude.
Yeah, I think there was a study, if I'm not mistaken, it was in UC Davis or UC San Diego, where
Yep.
they actually did gratitude journals and had college students just do the simple practice every night to document things that they're grateful for. And they found the students who actually did that practice, they tended to have better mental resilience to the stress that comes from just, being in college life and dealing with all the professional demands of college life. And for me, since I read that study, I've personally started doing the gratitude journal where I just write one thing that I'm grateful for, something that someone did for me, and something good that I did for someone else, and what it is that I'm grateful for that day. Because I think the negative bias, which as humans, we're so inclined to, we can have 100 great things happen and one negative thing happen, and all we'll remember is that one negative thing, we'll go to bed and we'll wake up thinking that same thought. So the gratitude journal for me personally, I would say it really has shifted the way I keep my focus right now. And like you said, the simple things, right? The roof over your head, the food you eat. I'm living in Boston now, and I see all these homeless people, and it just breaks my heart, like how much we take for granted. And even the health of your kids, right? Because you see so many young people struggling, and then your kids are making good choices. Even those things which are so out of your hand as they grow older, you realize, oh my gosh, I have like such little control over life, and even the life of the people you love, especially. And they make good choices, and you just have to be grateful for all those things. So yeah, gratitude is so powerful. Now, specifically, when you speak about nutrition, you chose the paleo diet and the Mediterranean. Why did you specifically choose these two?
So for our audience and the clients that I work with, the Mediterranean diet, as we know, has the most research behind it. And, it also has been shown to be one of the predominant type of diets in some of the blue zones as well. So a blue zone is an area where people has the most dense population of people that live beyond 100. And so it is one of the most balanced diets, I would say. It's rich in, when you look at a Mediterranean diet food pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid is fruits and vegetables. And then it's, healthy fats. So things like olive oil and nuts and seeds. And then there is, of course, some protein. So more of like your fish or chicken, if that's in your wheelhouse. And then, it kind of moves up to like the tip of the pyramid, which is like your red meat and your sweets. And the difference between a Mediterranean diet and a paleo diet is that a Mediterranean diet can incorporate some grains. So that's one of the main differences, whereas a paleo diet does remove grains. And in some paleo diets, it also removes dairy. So both of these diets are great because they really help to stabilize blood sugars. They really help with reducing inflammation in the body, help with weight loss. And really for us in our practice, we have our clients go on a therapeutic diet, which is very similar to both of these diets, to really drop that inflammation for about 6 weeks. And then after the 6-week period, we have them also do a genomic test. And through genomic testing, we can determine what long-term diet is going to be best for them. So whether it's paleo or whether it's Mediterranean or whether it's keto or a vegan diet. And it's based on how genetically we're able to process dietary fats, saturated fats, how we're able to some people, genetically speaking, need a higher need for omega-3 fatty acids. Some people need, genetically speaking, need a higher amount of choline or a higher amount of iron. And so, of course, if you're more genetically predisposed to needing more omega-3s or more choline or more iron, then a vegan diet is not going to be a good fit for you, right? Of course, there are ways that you can supplement some of those things, but the genomic testing really does give a lot of insight into what a long-term diet is best for that individual, right? So on social media, on the internet, we see a lot of people talk about, carnivore diets are good. Some people say they're bad. Some people say vegan diets are good. Some people say they're bad. And there's just so much confusion. And ultimately, what I've learned is that is very individualized. So last week, I was going over this testing with a client, and it was a big aha moment for her because for, the previous 15 years, she had been doing a high-fat Weston A. Price type of diet, and her genomic results revealed that ketogenic high-fat diets are not good for her. And it made sense because over those 15 years of her incorporating this diet, she gained almost 100 pounds. And she knew intuitively something was off because it's not like she was eating, bad food. She just wasn't eating the right types of food for her blueprint, for her genetic makeup. And so for her, the ideal diet was a blend of Mediterranean paleo based on her genetic predispositions. And so that really was a huge eye opener for her.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because testing genomics is not mainstream medicine practice. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the interesting part of functional medicine. It's not only what's in mainstream or current publications, it's what's been proven from a clinical perspective as well. And then you build on it. So I think that's really a very interesting point that you brought up. Because now that I'm doing more research on the microbiome, and the reason I asked you that question about Mediterranean versus paleo, I just find that focusing on creating a healthy microbiome just seems to address a lot of root cause issues, because I am an allergist, immunologist, and I've noticed it all seems to somehow tie back to the gut microbiome. Mm-hmm. And it's such a complicated subject. It's not just as simple as, yes, fermented foods help, and taking supplements to a certain extent can help, but still it doesn't seem to fix a lot of problems. One of the things I found very interesting when especially looking into chronic lifestyle diseases was with South Asians. So I'm Indian heritage, and diabetes, type 2 diabetes is so rampant in my family. And also the reason why I went down this path of intentional lifestyle choices. And looking at South Asians, there are problems within the glucose transport within muscles, which genetically make us more prone to having type 2 diabetes at a much smaller BMI, you know? So for me, with a BMI of 20, I was still in the pre-diabetic range, and I have relatives who, through marriage, from my brother's side as well, and they have like BMI 25, 26, Caucasian inheritance, and their BMI is like 25, 26, but the hemoglobin A1C is like 4. I'm like, that is so not fair.
Yeah.
But that just shows how much the power of epigenetics, genetics, years and years of how from an evolutionary point of view, your body has evolved. And you carry those genes from your ancestors. And somehow knowing where you stand makes such a huge difference. And going back to the point about paleo versus Mediterranean and use of grains, I have incorporated some whole grains because I recognize the certain really healthy gut bacteria, they actually require that type of carbohydrates. And also you do have the good carbohydrates that you can get from plants, which are your prebiotics, and they're very essential to the butyrate producing bacteria, which are very essential for your gut health and your immune health. So all that just to say, yes, I can totally understand how understanding the genomics of an individual before making food recommendations makes a huge difference in helping to guide the individual in a more personalized way and in a way of practicing personalized medicine. So that's really great. Thanks for sharing that. You also talk about eating the rainbow. What is an easy strategy to accomplish this?
Yeah. So basically, when I talk about eating the rainbow, it's incorporating different colors of foods into your meals, right? So the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blues, the purples, the whites, the tans, right? And ideally, what I tell people is try to pick at least 2 to 3, or even more if you can, but start with 2 to 3 per 2 to 3 colors per meal, right? So there's so many options within that, right? So try to at least choose 2 to 3, and at each meal ask, like, what color am I missing? Is there a color that I keep on eating that a color that I'm not eating enough of? And, when you kind of get used to framing, these questions in your mind as you prepare meals, you'll learn to, start incorporating more of these vegetables and fruits into your meals, and really, how you can be versatile with them, right? So using different vegetables in your salads, right? These days with social media, there's so many like recipe type of platforms that we can follow and get inspiration from, but you can keep it simple too, right? Like some days I literally always keep a bag of frozen vegetables from Costco in my freezer. And if I don't have time to, along with my main meal, prep like, some sort of fancy vegetables alongside it, I'll just boil a few of those frozen vegetables, put some sea salt, some olive oil, some different herbs on top. And there's my serving of vegetables, right? And then I also try to incorporate at least 2 fruits a day. I know fruit has been given a bad rap, but when you eat fruit in its whole form, all the fiber from the fruit is going to help stabilize the blood sugar as well. And usually eating fruit at the end of the meal, after you've had your protein, after you've had your fiber from your vegetables, is going to further help stabilize the blood sugar from the fruit. And it's also about serving size, right? And that goes with any food is, it's very easy to overeat certain foods, right? Even something like watermelon, it's very easy to overeat watermelon. So really keeping your serving sizes to, being mindful of your serving sizes is important as well.
Yeah. And any day I rather, myself included, overeat on the fruits than the processed foods. Because the truth be told is because of the fiber content, you can actually only eat so much before you feel so full. And the nice thing about watermelon is the large water quantity it has. It really fills you up. And I really think there's a disservice being done if people restrict about their fruit intake because of the amount of antioxidants and, like you were talking about, the anti-inflammatory effects of these foods, which is so crucial, especially if you're already with an autoimmune disease or have a family history of cancer. These foods are powerhouses for enhancing your immune response, getting rid of cancer cells, because we all have cancer cells, but it's really the vigilance of our immune system that protects us from developing cancer down the road. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Fruits are so important, especially the berries. Yeah, there's such a great source of fiber, antioxidants, and they're not very high in sugar. So yeah, definitely load up on those, and you get all your different colors when you eat all the different berries.
And it's also thinking about it seasonally too, right? So you don't want to be eating watermelon and mangoes in January, right? So maybe stick to more berries. And, for some people, they may lower their fruit intake a little bit, especially the tropical fruits in the winter months. And then as summer approaches and through the summer months, you will eat more seasonally appropriate fruits, right? Like go ham on the mangoes, right? And so you want to think of it that way as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good to think about. How about the core differences between good fat versus bad fats, and why are good fats so crucial for our well-being?
Yeah. So basically, when it comes to fats, as you mentioned, there's good fats. So the good fats are going to be things like our monounsaturated fats, like olive oil, avocados, nuts, polyunsaturated fats, which are more so our omega 3s and omega 6s. And we want to have those in balance. So these are going to be things like fatty fish or flaxseed or chia seeds. Walnuts contain a good amount of omega 3 fats. And then you have your natural saturated fats, which, as I mentioned, for some people, it's not that you are going to eliminate them completely, but you might have to limit your intake based on your genetic predisposition. But saturated fats could be things like coconut oil and ghee and grass-fed butter. And, if you eat a little bit of red meat, that's going to have some saturated fat in it as well. And then bad fats are going to be things like your trans fats, which are found in processed foods, margarine, a lot of baked goods. There is a little bit of controversy around seed oils these days. And so for me, I know there's studies that show that they are not as bad as they're made out to be, but I think the issue is more so how they're processed. And all oils are processed at the end of the day, right? So really trying to eat more whole food fats, like I said, avocados, nuts, seeds. These are all whole food fats, but some of the bad fats would be, like I said, the trans fats, and then highly refined vegetable oils and canola oils are going to be, categorized under the bad fats, unhealthy fats, because they are more refined and processed. And so when it comes to good fats, our good fats are really going to help support our brain function. They're going to support hormone production. They're going to help with nutrient absorption. They're going to support our gut microbiome. They're going to reduce inflammation. They're going to improve heart health. Whereas the bad fats are kind of going to do the opposite, right? They're going to promote a lot of inflammation in the body, which is going to result in, coronary artery disease, obesity, decline in cognitive function. They're also going to impair insulin sensitivity and cause more metabolic issues. And they also will increase LDL and lower HDL as well. So really trying to, incorporate more of those good fats, healthy fats into your diet, and minimizing and or avoiding the bad fats.
Yeah. Yeah, because for the longest time, I also heard about the omega-6, the linoleic acid, especially got a really bad rap. But we do have evidence that it helps with skin health, lowering the bad cholesterol, improving heart health. So at the end of the day, is the balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I recently had the omega-3, omega-6 test done.
Yep.
And I had like little to no omega-3, and I was shocked. And I eat fish,
Yeah.
so, and now I have to take the supplements that will help boost omega-3 and the EPAs and all of that. So I think we still have so much to learn, like you had pointed out, about each individual, because it's never one size fits all. Everyone's body, the way you process food is so different. And some of us have to be more conscious about what type of food choices we're eating. And so now I'm trying to be more conscious about eating more fatty fish, and, not consuming as much of the processed foods, because I think at the end of the day, all of that does make a difference. So being conscious about the foods we eat, and when we were talking about all the different diets, how confusing it is. For me right now, my go-to is what is going to enhance your microbiome. So can you explain why maintaining a healthy, diverse microbiome is so crucial, and how can fermented foods contribute to that goal?
Yeah, so it's really important to have a healthy and diverse microbiome, as you said, because it really is essential for proper digestion. It's essential for immunity. So, about 80% of our immune function lies in our gut and has a lot to do with our gut microbiome. It's also important for hormonal balance. So, a lot of hormones are converted in the gut. And so, we need the right types of bacteria to have proper hormonal balance. There's also a huge connection between the gut and the brain as well. So, if you struggle with things like brain fog and, poor memory, whatever it might be, even Alzheimer's, like you really want to make sure you optimize the gut because of the gut brain axis, right? They're directly connected. And that being said, it can also impact your mood, right? So things like depression and anxiety, a lot of that has to do with an unhealthy gut microbiome. And so when you have a healthy gut microbiome, it is going to help regulate inflammation. It's going to help balance hormones, as I said, specifically estrogen and cortisol. There's a whole there's something called the estroblome, right, which is basically gut bacteria which help you regulate your levels of estrogen. When you have a healthy gut microbiome, it's going to help you break down food more efficiently. It's also going to help support mental health. And then it's also going to protect against harmful pathogens. So we all have, good bacteria and bad bacteria. And ideally, I typically say it's like the 80-20 rule, where if you have 80% good bacteria, that's going to really prevent that remaining 20% from overgrowing and becoming a problem, right? So we want to kind of keep them at bay and keep them in that 20% range. And fermented foods can really help with maintaining this healthy, diverse gut microbiome, along with maintaining a lot of, as we talked about, the rainbow, right? Eating a lot of foods from the spectrum of the rainbow is going to help support the gut microbiome because they're rich in fiber, which help feeds the gut microbiome. So for people who don't know what fermented foods are, they're basically foods that you may have heard of, but you just didn't know they're fermented. Things like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir. I know kombucha is big. You have to be careful with that one, though, because it can be high in sugar. But fermented foods basically introduce a lot of these beneficial microbes into your gut microbiome and feed the good bacteria, and therefore will help support digestion and enhance microbiome diversity.
Yeah. I think you've touched on so many important points. 90% of your serotonin basically comes from your gut. And, we now call our gut the second brain.
Yep.
Because we don't realize how important what we eat really regulates how we think and how we behave. But now we have more and more evidence on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love how you spoke about, the immune aspect of your microbiome. Because a lot of people, especially when they are like having a cold during the flu season,
Mm-hmm.
the more of the fermented foods and the fruits and vegetables and all of those, the prebiotics, the probiotics, the whole spectrum to promote gut health really protects them from having these simple infections. And to your point about the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, really the difference is the quantity, because you have something known as the pathobionts, because at low quantities, they're fine and they're actually essential to a certain extent. But when they are overpopulated in your gut, then they start causing like the leaky gut and candidal overgrowth and have all kinds of gut issues. So, I think you've really shared a lot of great information with us. So, Dipa, now we're halfway through summer. People are still traveling, going on vacation, visiting family and friends. And I love this whole chapter, how you've dedicated on social events and tips that people can follow while they're in social events. Can you share a little bit about how people can, follow their healthy eating habits while they are placed in situations where they have very limited control over what is being served?
Yep. So, if you are, depending on the type of outing it is, if it's a restaurant you can always choose, help maybe guide the decision in terms of what restaurant you're going to be going to, a restaurant that's going to have, a good choice of healthy salads, healthy proteins. Ultimately, what I found being vegetarian and gluten-free, which can be quite challenging, is there's always options, right? And in many cases, you just need one option, right? It's not like you're going to choose 5 things to eat. You're just going to choose one thing, right? So if you're going with a group of friends, perhaps, having a little bit of say in the restaurant that you'll be picking, looking at the menu ahead of time so you can, really decide what you're going to eat and not fall into the pressures of what other people are ordering. If you are going to a social event, if it's a potluck, or even if it's, you're going to someone's house for dinner, you can always bring something to the event which you can eat because you've prepared it, right? Whether, once again, it's a healthy appetizer or a healthy salad or something to contribute to the main, whether it's like a sheet pan of like baked vegetables or roasted vegetables. Whatever that is, right? And, if you feel comfortable, you can also share with your, your host, what some of your perhaps limitations might be if you're not eating gluten, if you're not eating dairy. And really, like I said, there's always choices, right? So focusing on, a lot of, as we've talked about, fruits and vegetables. And you may have something that may not be perfect, but what I found with working with clients over time is that they notice that they don't need the whole slice of cake, right? They might just need one or two bites. So, over time, as you cultivate this awareness, as you cultivate the intentional living, you'll make better choices. And what I tell people is that the gap between misalignment and alignment becomes less and less, right? To a point where this is your way of life, right? Health is not a destination that we're trying to reach. Health is a daily practice, right? So there's no destination, right? Until you die, right? That's the destination. So while you have these days to live, like live them with intention, right? Live them with purpose, live them with health, because our time is so limited on this planet. And why not live them being healthy, vibrant, and energy and energized, right? So, when you're traveling, you can do the same, right? A lot of people think that when they travel, like, oh, I'm just going to go off the deep end. But we went to Italy being vegetarian and gluten-free, and it was completely possible. Like, we did enjoy a little bit of gelato. Like I said, you don't have to be perfect, right? Like, the thing that I always like to abide by is like the 80-20 rule, right? Where 80% of the time you're eating really well, and then 20% of the time you may have like a little treat. And there's healthier versions of certain treats as well, right? There's plenty of recipes that you can find online that are healthier versions of like your chocolate cake, or choosing sorbet instead of ice cream, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can still enjoy your favorite meals and treats, and just make little changes to them to make them a healthier version.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so great that you shared about the 80-20 rule. Um, Another thing that I've noticed personally for me myself, because I used to be a huge sugar addict, and I had to detox myself, come out of it, especially with my family history of type 2 diabetes, and I knew, I just couldn't continue living like that. And one of the powers of changing your microbiome is it really influences your food thoughts.
Yes.
It's actually creepy in a way that, when I was a sugar addict, I could go to the mall, pass by the Cinnabon stall, and I can literally feel it calling my name, or it could
Yes.
be Krispy Kreme, right? And now that I've detoxed myself from sugar and I eat something really sugary, it actually kind of tastes nasty to me.
Yeah.
Because I've trained myself. And more importantly, I think it's the signals that our microbiome sends our brain. Because the more type of food you eat, the more you're developing certain types of bacteria, and they send signals to your brain telling you to eat more of those types of foods.
Yep.
When you start eating healthy, you actually start wanting the healthier types of foods naturally without having all that brain chatter, and feel like it's an uphill battle. So all the more reasons to, do this intentional pattern of incorporating, like you said, just start with the few fruits and vegetables, and over time keep adding as you feel led to with the seasonal fruits and vegetables. And over time, that will be the majority of your food. And, you won't even have the need for the 80-20, because you are living your best life by still consuming foods that are good for you. Because at the end of the day, it's really how we look at it, right? It's the messaging we tell ourselves. Oh, I'm depriving myself if I don't eat all this sugar, salt, and fat.
Yep.
Deepa, thank you so much. You've shared a lot of great information with us. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we conclude?
Yeah, I know, a lot of people like to start with food, but, another area that I think is equally as important is focusing on sleep and our quality of sleep, which has, really become impacted over the years, especially with technology. So, another thing to really dive into is optimizing sleep. And I share a lot of great tips in my book about that as well.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thank you again so much for being here with us. And for those of you who would like to read Deepa's book, she actually is very gracious and she's giving it for free. It's called Healing Habits. And I can share all of that in the show notes. So you guys, if you're interested, definitely take a look at her book. It's very easy to read and easy to follow. So thank you, Dipa. Thank you so much for your time. And if somebody wants to work with you and your husband, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, they can head over to our website. It's thelivingproofinstitute.com and find us there.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Thank you, Dipa. And I hope you have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.